So when we foster circular economy infrastructure, we utilize resilient and sustainable built materials and practices, will cause a fundamental shift in how our industry focuses. So I like to call this the trifecta of people, place, and planet.
I came from a utility background and even then was really interested in how much it drives our economy. I mean, I find it so interesting when we do have power outages, because if you don't have a battery backup, which, most people don't yet, you just sort of forget.
I've found that that's the case. Like if you actually do something, like take any small step even, all of a sudden you'll feel a little bit better about the greater problem. You can only really affect your own behavior and the stuff right around you.
Hi, I'm Sue.
And I'm Heath.
Together, we've created the Backyards to Boardrooms video podcast series.
Why? Because our planet has a problem. It is not very sustainable.
Luckily, we've come up with a solution to help. On Backyards to Boardrooms, we use the United Nations Sustainable Development Goals to highlight the work being done in our communities.
We chat with local leaders about causes such as sustainable cities and communities, responsible consumption and production, and climate action. Backyards to Boardrooms,
where local action creates global impact. Here we are in episode 7.
Here we are.
Episode 7 is sustainable practices.
It certainly is. Number 7.
Number 7. Who are we interviewing, Heath?
We're going to be listening to Matt Davidson from Sage Environmental. We're also going to be talking to Steve Russell from Roost Solar. And then last but certainly not least, Dora Anderson from Ecotecture.
From Ecotecture. And I had to grab my cheat sheet because I did not memorize the SDGs on this one. Usually I have it all up in my brain. Not this time.
I didn't either.
We put in this one SDG 7, which is affordable and clean energy.
Yep.
SDG 9, which is industry, innovation, and infrastructure. And SDG 13, which is climate action. Yeah. And they seem like 3 very random topics to put together. But when we actually kind of dug into it, we really uncovered some interesting stuff. There's some interesting stuff in this episode.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. And these 3 people and their organizations, there's some very, very interesting synergies.
Yeah. So enjoy. Welcome to episode 7. In this episode, we are talking about sustainable practices here in Vernon, BC. And with us today, we have Dora Anderson from Ecotecture.
Hey, everyone. Thanks for inviting me to join you today.
We're happy to have you, for sure. I can't wait to find out about Ecotecture. It's such a great word.
It is a great word.
Ecotecture. I love it, yeah.
And the website is beautiful as well.
Thank
I've
you.
read through. I did my research. I'm a good host.
Yeah, you are a good researcher.
So, Dora, why don't we start off with a little bio? I don't even know what the words are that are coming out of my mouth. Can you
tell us a little bit about yourself?
How about I tell you about the Ecotecture story?
Why are you on this show?
So I am the founding partner of Ecotecture, right here, Okanagan, local-based firm. We are a collective of specialized professionals. We have architects, registered interior designers, building technicians, all with a shared, deep-seated passion for revolutionizing the way we think about the built environment and how that interaction happens with our planet, and pushing more sustainable standards in our communities and advocating for that. So it's a new stream in terms of architecture and design that has that focus. So having been in the industry for as long as I have been, now approaching 20 plus years, I've seen and been exposed to how we have, been building buildings and spaces in our communities, and acknowledging that it's not a sustainable infrastructure that we're exposing ourselves to. And the more I've taken on a lot of these environmental certifications, I realize that it's not just about how that affects our economy, how that affects our planet, but also our users of these buildings and our community and the public's health and wellness. We design buildings to be safe havens for the public and for them to live, work, and play. And we want that to be a healthy, sustainable model. So that's what's really driven Ecotecture to be born.
When you say you've been in the industry, what were you doing? What were you doing in the industry up until this point? Like, what role did you play in the building process?
Yeah, so I am a registered interior designer by trade who's also a LEED accredited professional. And so I would interact with clients, developers, municipalities, for example, and developing spaces for them, and then seeing it through the built process. So working with builders and trades, and then at end of life, seeing what's happening to a lot of our buildings. So I've been exposed over the years to the full cycle from start to finish. And that is what really has opened up my eyes to how our infrastructure is currently set up and how devastating that is. Given the research that I love to do, I'm a bit of a nerd when it comes to white paper and soaking it all in, but seeing, okay, well, what is that ripple effect, right? And what is the recourse of the way we have been building?
So 2 questions then. First question is, what does LEED mean? What does it mean to be LEED certified? And then I'll tell you the second question after you answer the first one.
So elusive.
Spoon feeding. Yeah. Baby
All
steps.
right. So LEED, Passive House, and WELL are all environmental certifications. And most of them, Passive House is more of on the residential side of things in terms of an energy and green building rating system type of deal. And same with WELL and LEED. We see more on the commercial side of building. And it, again, is a rating system that helps guide designers and architects to design buildings in a more sustainable and health-focused way. But WELL, for example, focuses on the people inside of the building. So, is there nutritional food within X of any radius in the building? Looking at air quality, water quality, and establishing standards for what those items need to meet within the building. So it ranges anywhere from natural light and availability to all users in the building, encouragement of movement and physical fitness. So stairwells, they're not just stairwells anymore. They're, educational moments where we say, oh, if you reach third step, you've attained X amount of calories, or motivating things. There's all these different factors in terms of air quality, water quality, materials, where are they sourced from? Are they sustainable? Are they renewable materials? Are they VOC free? Volatile organic compounds? Are there chemicals in there that are going to harm people? So there's all these different ways in which we can check in to say, yeah, that actually is a good product. It's made sustainably, and it's going to contribute to a healthy interior environment.
So this is a moment where we can say, can we or can we not lick the windowsill?
Yeah, absolutely.
What?
I know what you're talking about. Like, I remember when I had my son, he was so little, and he was over at the window just going for it, right? And I had that moment where I was like, oh my goodness, what is in Windex? And I ran, and I like, you just have that moment where you're like, oh my goodness, no, that's bad. So yes,
Okay,
can I
get
lick
it.
the window
I get
or
it.
not? Very
That's
good
funny.
question.
I
Excellent.
have a question though. So we're talking about WELL and LEED, right? Those are acronyms, correct?
They are.
Can you tell us, for those of us who have no idea what WELL and LEED actually means. What do those acronyms stand for? What is it?
So WELL is with the Wellness Institute.
Oh, okay.
And LEED is a derivative of leadership in energy and environmental design. And out of that, LEED has developed from, like, when I first wrote LEED, there was only LEED. You could be a LEED AP and that was it. And now there's all these other offshoots to do just that, to tackle all the different project types that can exist, right? So now there's various different streams of the certification process so that someone can focus a project on a retrofit or a new build.
So that brings us then to the what is the problem that you're trying to solve? What is the problem that we're talking about
as it relates to sustainability, right?
Mm-hmm.
So our current built environment infrastructure follows a very linear format. And what I mean by that is this. So more commonly, we start by, first off, we harvest these potentially non-renewable raw materials from our lands, causing deforestation, soil degradation from all over the world to create what I like to call single-use building materials. Next biggest problem is when those raw materials are being sourced and produced in faraway places where we don't have view or control over how they're manufactured, that poses a whole other slew of challenges. You know, what chemicals are being added to adhesives and materials? What types of energy are they using to produce these materials? What labor equity practices are they employing? What extensive packaging are they using to transport these materials to us? All while depleting our employment opportunities here locally because we have sourced elsewhere. So after we produce this product, let's call it our material, building material, then we transport it from all over the world. And we kind of already know the impacts of that related to CO2 emissions from imports and transportation. I know often the way our system is set up, we need to source quickly and efficiently, and a lot of products are coming from elsewhere in order to meet that cost factor need. But it comes with a cost. It might not be a dollar cost, but it's affecting us in terms of an environmental cost and health and wellness, absolutely. And then after that gets shipped, however, and brought to our local building site, the next piece is we traditionally are sadly prone to solve for today's problem. So today's problem is what? We have a housing crisis. Right?
Yeah.
So what's happening right now is that we are solving the immediate problem, but we need to start thinking about the problematic challenges that's going to set us up at the end of these buildings, right? So because we're encouraging fast and efficient, what I like to call economies of scale is what we're building for right now. That's the model we're kind of stuck in. And developers and or builders are winning projects based on how fast they can deliver it and how cheaply they can deliver it. And we all know cheap and fast isn't always the best route. So what we have traditionally done, once we decide that a building's met its useful life, what happens to that building? So we see it time and time again, right? We bulldoze it down, and all of those materials go to our landfill. And what do? Then we just go back and repeat the process again. So this is an example of a linear economy.
If I can, I'm almost thinking about it like a timeline, right? You see one line along the screen, A to B to C to D to E, and it just keeps going down that linear path. Yes?
Yes.
So it doesn't start over at any point.
Well, it starts over, but it starts over back in the ground again.
Back at the beginning again.
Yeah.
It's kind of a bad habit that we started, when schools exploded and then universities exploded, and the building boom of the 70s and the 80s. I think we're now just in a bad habit of building things fast and cheap, right?
Absolutely. Yeah. And like I say, we solve problems today, but we rarely sit back and go, okay, what is the ripple effect of that? And what questions are we going to have to answer and problems are we going to have to solve in another 20 years because of the decisions we made today?
So that's then the next great question is then, what are you doing to solve the problem?
Well, this is kind of the beautiful piece and why, everyone at Ecotecture is so passionate about this, because this is something that we can advocate for. We can change what's been done in the past. So first and foremost, our team is actively promoting a circular economy infrastructure in our communities. So this is breaking that cycle of going back to the earth and asking for new when we already have produced a lot of different things. Let's figure out how we can break those down and reuse them. That's a big piece to the circular economy piece, is looking locally. So it's no different than the food story, right? You eat with the seasons and you support the local farmers. Well, buildings should be the same way. We should look what we have around us and build based on what we have available to us.
It brings to mind something that came up in episode 4, where we were talking about reduce, reuse, repair, refill, rot, and then recycle as that last piece, right? So there's a whole lot more of reduce, reuse, recycle. There's a whole lot of other steps that we can kind of add in there to make sure that circular economy is actually regenerating itself.
Brilliant. Absolutely. Yeah.
So
here we are.
Here we are.
Steve Russell, welcome to the show. Here you are from Roost Solar.
Thanks for having me. I'm excited to be here today.
Yeah, we're excited to have you.
From backyard straight into the boardrooms, we have solar power. So let's start talking. Steve,
We got the power. That song just came to mind. I don't know why, but...
And now you're going to be singing to the masses. Thanks, Heath. Steve, will you give us an introduction to yourself, how you got into solar power, and talk about your company a little bit?
Yeah, absolutely. So my name's Steve Russell, and I own and operate Roost Solar. Prior to starting Roost Solar, I worked with utilities, both in Canada and US and a little bit in Europe. And, moving to the Okanagan, not too many utilities here. So I decided, looking around and seeing that there continued to be a need for power, and as the model for utilities was starting to change to a more distributed model, that there really weren't a lot of options in Vernon, and so looked into that and launched Roost Solar about a decade ago now, on summer solstice, and here we are 10 years later, and hundreds and hundreds of homes with solar power in the Okanagan that we've installed.
Amazing. And I met you right around the time that you started that company. So it's been cool to watch you grow here and get to where you're at now.
Yeah. I remember that.
So, the story of getting into solar power and producing a new kind of power, a new kind of energy in our province was really cool. Can you dive into that a little bit, talking about where power comes from in BC?
Yeah, I mean, absolutely. So BC is a little bit unique in North America and globally in that most of our power has come from hydropower. That's why it's called BC Hydro. So that comes from hydro dams, and it's always been a very centralized model where you've got a central generation through large dams that then, through a vast network of transmission and distribution lines, distribute that power across the province, so that when you flip your light switch on, there is light. That model has worked really well. It's of course an old approach, and increasingly and globally is the introduction of more distributed generation. So what I mean by that is sources of power like solar and wind and other things, where you're producing more power where the power is actually being used. So we specialize in what would be considered rooftop solar, and that or even ground mount, but where you're producing it and using it really in a spot and feeding any excess back into the grid. The utility grid is I'd say a little bit, it's evolved, and currently a little more under strain. For the longest time and historically, BC Hydro was always a net exporter of power to, through the Western Interconnection, which includes Washington and Oregon, California and Alberta. There's a lot of trading of power that goes on through those corridors. And like I say, it was always a net exporter, but in recent years, with increase of drought and declining reservoir levels, BC Hydro has turned more recently into a net importer of power.
Very interesting.
And the other, I worked for PowerX back prior to Roost Solar on a contract, and it really is like very much like walking into a stock market, trading floor. There's a lot of screens and a lot of transactions that are occurring in that trading wing, and it has historically been a pretty good source of income for BC, and a way that we're able to keep rates lower here.
You touched on the problem, though, the problem that we're talking about in this episode, in encouraging people to pursue more sustainable practices. What is going to last longer and do better for our community? So the problem then is, like you touched on, is that we are using more power and we have less supply. Is that about right?
Yeah, I'd say that's certainly part of the problem. I mean, if you look at the kind of at the highest level, the problem that we're starting to face is through the ongoing emissions. I mean, we've developed economies globally, locally, everywhere that have been, based on a carbon economy. We annually and globally burn somewhere to the tune of 51 billion tons of greenhouse gas emissions into the atmosphere, and so
it's a big number.
It's a massive number. It's incomprehensibly large, truthfully, but as we continue to do that, that's caused all the things that we've started to feel here in Canada, certainly more acutely in other regions of the world: increased fire, smoke, drought, all those types of things, and flooding and whatnot. And so in light of a recognition, fairly broadly now, I would say, or that we need to change that and transition towards alternative ways to do those things. There's been a big push to electrification of lots of things. So if you're to look really locally and read through the Vernon Climate Action Plan, even as example, locally in our community, they identify it as an example that roughly I think it was around 30% of our Vernon greenhouse gas emissions would be from heating loads in your home, and roughly another, I think it's 67 or 63 or something percent would come from transportation. I mean, and so in light of trying to move away from some of those sources, the only real way you can do that is through electrification. And what that means is, rather than having a gas furnace, you look at maybe installing heat pumps. Rather than having a gas hot water tank, you're installing electric units. And same thing for vehicles in terms of EVs. And yeah, I mean, obviously solar is another big contributor to that, and we can certainly touch on sort of how solar can fit more into that whole equation. But back to your point, Sue, essentially there's been an increase in demand for energy, both industry, individuals, everywhere. There's only so much capacity, and there's a fine balance in that grid where demand and supply need to match, and it's a dance up and down that we don't see. We just sort of are able to, like I say, turn on the lights and expect them to work, but in the background you're always having to make sure that you match that supply and demand. Otherwise you end up with brownouts or blackouts, and increasingly the grid is struggling to do that, in part because of changing climate and increased periods of drought, and dam reservoir levels that, maybe can't quite keep up as much. And so, as I suggested, becoming a net importer of electricity, that's where, alternative generation and distributed generation sources like solar can really start contributing to a more resilient grid. I think one of the things that maybe is intuitive, but solar panels naturally produce the most when the sun is out and hot, which tends to coincide with periods of drought and extended heat waves, right? So it actually could contribute beautifully into the province of BC's electricity grid, where you get to save some of that water and save some of the levels in the reservoirs for when you need it later, and also, as we talked about with the trading arm of PowerX, by really being able to produce a lot of that clean energy and support our neighbors. Alberta, we trade with Alberta. I think even currently it's roughly six. We sell them about 6 times what we import today, and certainly I think that could be a lot higher over time as we become kind of a BC superpower of clean energy.
And the residents of the Okanagan, interior BC, have access to more sun than anybody in British Columbia. So we could be producing a lot of it for our province and selling it on the exchange, the energy exchange.
Yeah, they do call it the sunny Okanagan for a reason.
That's right,
for sure.
So it's become far more accessible over the years. Like, it's more affordable. It's more abundant as far as, like you said, hundreds of homes you've done over the last decade or so. So it's really becoming something that people are turning to. And I'm surprised. When are we going to get to the point where, it's going to be a required part of new construction that we implement, green energy options for those buildings? Will we ever get to that point?
Well, I think we probably will. I mean, I think that we tend to, you look at other jurisdictions, you can see that. I do. To your first point around the solar panel or solar powers being more accessible, and this speaks to one of the reasons it started Roost Solar, is that the belief that technology and innovation can contribute to a cleaner environment, and the way out of some of these problems is through technology and innovation. And you take solar panels as an example. In the last decade alone, they've dropped about 80% in terms of the price of the unit. And that is through innovation and increase in efficiency. But more than that, it's in adoption. People have started to adopt it. It's now mass produced. You gain economies of scale. And now it becomes the cheapest energy source ever. It's at a point where you can certainly mandate solar into new building codes and the STEP codes, as well as the zero carbon code. But I also think that it should just be there on its own merit, because if you were to look at the economics of it, and the requirement of, hey, look, I have stability in my energy prices by installing solar power, and hey, I'll be saving money by doing it during the life of the program or product. I mean, it becomes just very accessible by nature of it making the most sense. And that's where there's only so far you can go with the green initiatives if it's just because you're trying to do good. It at some point really needs to be able to stand on its own, and I think that's where solar has evolved to that point where absolutely it can. And the environment right now with what we talked about with BC Hydro and the grid is it's even better right now, because BC Hydro recently has delivered a few incentives that are available both to individuals. So you get up to $10,000 in incentives as an individual towards solar and batteries, and it's even more, $25,000 for companies or corporations and doing the same thing, and even higher for Indigenous governing bodies. Yeah, there's a lot of opportunity there to install solar on the rooftop, and really just it's about saving money and doing good at the same time.
I really like what you touched on there too, talking about economic growth having an environmental impact, right? We have to balance business growth and our success in economy with a success in a reduction in the carbon we're putting into the air, in the power that we're generating in a cleaner way.
there's often been this ongoing tension between economic growth and, sustainable or green technology. Mm-hmm. And, I think for me, there's a recognition that when you look at it and the longer term, or if you look at the innovations that can occur, that tension doesn't need to exist anymore. It ultimately get to that point where the right economic choice happens to also be the sustainable choice, because I don't think anybody, even if someone's not really keen on green energy or what have you, I think there's a recognition that it will change at some point. You are going to. It's just a time. You're going to have to get away from burning fossil fuels for generation and transportation at some point. And right. As those resources begin to deplete further and the costs go up, it's natural that you're going to have to look for those alternatives. And I think it really just comes down to more how quickly you do it. And I mean, I'm in the camp because of the fact that I want to be able to leave this earth in as good a place as I came into it for my children, that I think we need to do it very, very quickly.
All right.
I am so excited for today's conversation. We have Matt Davidson here with us today from Sage Environmental. And when I first pitched this idea to Matt, one day downtown on the sidewalk, he was like, "No, I don't want to be on a podcast." But I think we sold it.
Yeah, I think he was worried about the call to come in, and then when it finally happened, you actually I don't think you're as nervous as you thought you were going to be.
Yeah, well, we'll see. We're just getting going.
How you feeling?
I feel fine, thank you.
Great.
Good.
So let's kick this off, Matt. Will you tell us a little bit about yourself and how you got started with Sage Environmental, and the purpose and the goals behind your business?
Sure. I was born and raised here in the Okanagan, and when I went to school, here and at the coast for versions of environmental science. I ended up being an environmental scientist, which is what I do now. And eventually, after working a number of jobs, I decided to start a firm. I did that when I moved back. So my wife also grew up here, and when we moved back to Vernon, Sage started. That was in 2008, and we focus on services for the land base in the Okanagan region, primarily the southern interior as well. But really, we're focused on working in our area here. So we're Okanagan specialists, we like to think, and we do environmental consulting related to contaminated sites and land remediation, environmental assessment, permitting, ecological restoration, and construction environmental management.
Ooh, that's a lot.
That's a mouthful.
Yeah.
That's a lot of very important stuff.
It's an impressive list. I mean, we're talking about the range of the work that you do, and I'm so inspired by it.
Well, so, it's a narrow range inside consulting, but it's what we're good at.
Mm-hmm.
It seems narrow,
and probably for a lot of people don't understand really what all that means and entails, and why it's required.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah, there's we get to educate and empower frequently.
Yeah.
So important. So let's talk about the problem then. What do you see as the problem? Why are sustainable practices and the environment interlinked? Why are they so important?
Yeah, just a small question. So thank you for that.
Are you going to break it down?
Yeah, I'll just start at the top. No, I'll speak very much from my perspective and sort of my experience working in the Okanagan in that context. Part of the reason I came back here and part of the reason people want to live here is it's a beautiful place. It always has been a beautiful place. People have lived here for many years before it became a settled place. And when the settlers arrived, they realized it was a good place for agriculture, natural resource use and extraction. With that comes the building of communities. And we've kind of built out our landscape with agriculture, with natural resource extraction, road building, home building. It's been progress. It's been how these communities have developed. With that we're pushing to the edges all of our ecosystems. We're affecting the waterways, straightening the streams and hardening the edges of the lakes. We're affecting the fisheries and the water quality. We're pushing our terrestrial ecosystems like grasslands and wetlands to the edges. And the other beings, the animals on the landscape that we share the space with, are having less and less space to live. And those activities have also caused contaminant impacts. So we've got contamination of soil, air, and water in locations around the Okanagan and the southern interior. And these things are a risk to human health and to the environment. And so we have kind of built for ourselves this state or this board of play that I look at, I guess, with respect to my practice, where we've squished all of these ecologically valuable remnants into little niches at the edge of the board. And they're deserving of protection and in need of our help if we want them to stay on the landscape, if we actually want to share that landscape with them the way we intended to. And then those contaminant impacts are there. And so that's kind of the state we're looking at. And now we're overlaying it with climate impacts. So climate has, for my whole career, climate impacts have been a problem. They're clearly getting worse as time goes on. In the Okanagan, it's flood, fire, and drought. We're all familiar with that story. We all know farmers who've been affected by drought. We all know someone who's been affected by a flood. We all know someone who's had their home burned down. And its frequency is increasing in all these events. Severity is increasing, and uncertainty is increasing, which has made our functional working state as, say, an environmental scientist or just a person trying to live here trickier to manage.
That's a big job. You've got a community like Vernon, which isn't, a huge city, but large enough that it's making an impact in its environment right now over an extended period of time. And now what you're trying to do is reassess what's happened, how to fix it, and how to manage the growth of the city as well as repair a lot of the damage. That's a big burden, Matt. You got a lot on your shoulders.
Well, and we're doing a very small part of what you just described. There's, the planning of the city is done by the very competent planners at the city, and there's lots of other professionals involved here. Our part is a small niche, but part of a collective effort that needs to be undertaken for sure.
For sure. And we mentioned, you mentioned earlier that there is a permitting process too that you're a part of.
Yeah, sometimes. So we have regulations in place to protect all of these features that we talked about. And if someone wants to make a change on the landscape, they often have to seek permission to do so. And part of that process, if they're approaching an ecosystem or habitat of some kind, is the assessment to determine whether or not that habitat is critical or deserving of protection, could be improved, has a wildlife component that needs to be managed. It can be quite a process in some cases. We
started talking about the problem, which kind of evolved into talking about what you're doing, what your contribution towards that problem is, which I think was a beautiful transition. Mm-hmm. And so I think the next piece is talking about what you're doing to solve the problem, but also how the community can be part of those solutions. So what are some of the tangible action steps that you are taking within Sage Environmental to help solve the problem?
Yeah, well, we're kind of think of ourselves as a resilience building organization to the best of our ability. We like to say that we're fixing the broken places. We like to leave things better than we found them. Those are kind of catchphrases that remind us of the direction that we're trying to push things. With the example of contaminated sites, for example, these are liabilities on the landscape that may affect human health or the environment. We're conducting the assessments to determine whether or not those liabilities are there, whether the risk is there, and then working to remove them, remediate them. And so our component of that project is to be the professionals who quantify the risk and then help to manage the removal. And then we'll work with contractors and regulators and various other parties in order to remediate a risk on the landscape. If we're talking about habitat work, it's being impacted in lots of ways, either by historic landscape uses, by potential climate impacts that are coming, or by future land uses if there's a construction project or something going on. So we'll assess habitats when projects are being proposed or underway, determine whether or not there's a risk to them, determine what protection and mitigation measures need to be applied, and then work with the project proponents to protect the environment and those features from those activities. And then occasionally, or often, I should say, we will work with remediating or restoring some of those habitats. So ecological restoration is a component of our practice where we're rebuilding the habitats under threat. You may be removing an invasive species from an area and then restoring with native species to try and build back some of those niches that we've lost through the years.
Okay, I have two questions. Number one is, what's
You
the
go.
most common thing you see come across your desk? And the second one is, what's your favorite thing to work on? I don't imagine they're the same thing.
Yeah. The most common thing to come across my desk. That's tough. It's pretty diverse. We have a pretty diverse set of clientele at this point. The most common drivers right now I'll maybe speak to. So right now we're working on recovery for some Indigenous communities that have been burned out. So that's a really unfortunate, and it's a sad start to the job. But that's a driver that impacts a large area of the land base and a lot of people. And so that's a pretty common current type of job that we're doing. And I really get excited about the actual fixing part. So I love remediation projects and I love restoration projects. So those are the things. I guess I'm a fixer at heart.
Right. And maybe that part of my question is, what would be an example of a contaminated site?
Yeah, I think the easiest example for people to picture from every day would be potentially an old gas station. So an old gas station that might have put tanks in the ground. Those tanks might have leaked, and then that may have impacted soil and groundwater in the area, and then also might have impacted the neighboring property or a nearby stream or something like that. So that's probably the most common example. Not to say that every gas station is contaminated.
Right.
Many new ones are managed really well. They aren't going to get contaminated, but some of the older ones.
And of course, there are bigger situations like old industrial sites or deconstructed areas or decommissioned areas that have used to work in some sort of environmental impact.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah, anywhere where we've had communities develop, they're going to be on the landscape somewhere.
Right.
Super interesting. Yeah. So solar power, building technology, rehabilitation of environments. It's all about taking better care of our planet, right? Finding more sustainable solutions so that our planet can live for longer.
That's right. There's no end to what possibilities are out there for us to tap into.
Mm-hmm. And so that also means that there's no end to how the community can contribute. So how you, as our listener, can take action in your community. Coming up next, we have community action.
When we talk about the end of life of a building, it shouldn't be just end of life anymore. We should be encouraging people to ask more questions. So what other purposes could that building serve before we pull the bulldozer out? Where could we repurpose or reuse some of those building materials that are in that building already?
Repurpose is a good word to add to that list.
Good one.
I like it. Yeah.
Repurpose, upcycle, and not just the building materials, but the fixtures that are within it as well. So this, how better could we design the buildings in the first place? That's where us designers and architects come in place. And this is a term I want to share with you guys, this idea of design for disassembly. And what I mean by that is we'd like to encourage our municipalities and our designers and our architects of the world to start designing with renewable materials that can easily be disassembled at the end of a building's lifespan.
We got to start building with Lego.
Yes.
So we've talked about advocating for that particular change for the disassembly process to start thinking ahead a little bit more. I feel like this is the right point in the conversation for us to shift to how the community can participate. We're already talking about thinking ahead a little bit more, but what else can we do?
I really feel the ask of our municipalities and our provincial electees at this point is to invest more in research and development and encouraging innovation and sustainable tech, reuse, recycling within our city limits. So, for example, in Vancouver, if I were to put in my specifications that all drywall from a demolition site is to get sequestered and sent off, they have recycling plants right in Vancouver. This is an opportunity where we could be investing in that kind of tech and those kind of businesses to keep employment and dollars in our city and answer a challenge that us designers and architects are experiencing.
I mean, one of the challenges about a lot of this too is cost, right? I mean, that's probably the number one thing that people think about when it comes to building in a sustainable way, is that it's way more expensive. People really have a hard time justifying that, don't they?
Yeah, I would agree. But what is the value proposition there, right? And we're starting to realize too that sustainability does not equal, in all cases, more cost. I think in terms of the public, what they can be doing, let's say you're demolishing a kitchen. Habitat for Humanity Vernon has a kitchen salvage program. They will come and they will take your kitchen out after you've decommissioned all the plumbing, and they'll put it in a new to them home for someone else, or sell it in their restore here in Vernon, right here in Vernon.
See, that's cool. A lot of people probably don't know that.
Yeah, and like I say, there's all these resources that we just need to tap into. But I just see so much potential in our community for our municipalities to grow those opportunities beyond what we already have when I look at other cities and what they're doing.
I cringe anytime I have to throw something in the garbage. I'm like, really? There isn't anywhere that I can recycle this? So, like, I've got stations all over my house of bags of things that need to go to recycling. Finding the time to get there is another question, but it's so cool to know that we have something like Habitat for Humanity that will help you with that process.
Absolutely. And you just brought up a big point, which is ease and access. So what's happening right now on build sites is, so a contractor typically will put an all-in-one, for example, bin. We've all seen the big bins that end up on construction sites. And anything and everything that's getting demolished gets pushed and placed in that bin. But perhaps if all-in-one were to segregate their bin between the waste and even a habitat section for all the plumbing and fixtures, just think of the amount of waste that every single build site would no longer be putting into the landfill. The cumulative impact of just that would be massive.
Nice.
Thank you, Dora, for coming in and sharing your passion with us.
Yeah, thanks, Dora. It's great to have you here.
It's
interesting to hear about what you're doing.
Thanks for making me a part of this.
What can we do as a community to contribute to a greener future?
Yeah, I mean, there's so many things that you can do, and we've talked a lot really
about solar,
electricity. Yeah, and I mean, so certainly there are the obvious things that you hear people talk about, and that is like the electrification of various sources. So if you look around and you see that, for example, you may have an aging air conditioning unit, and rather than just going and buying a new AC unit, well, why not explore installing a heat pump instead? It's almost the same price. You'll also get heating out of it. Same thing with anything that sort of is on gas. Look for an electrification route. But I think the other thing that with all of these initiatives or change, it always can have some sort of discomfort, right? And and I think it has to go at a pace and a level where people are willing to make that change collectively. And so, I think the other things you can do, certainly if this is something that you care about, you can certainly talk to your MLA and also just, even when you're looking locally or provincially or nationally in terms of how you want to cast your vote, you need to look at what issues matter to you. And if this is one of them, then it's something that you want to consider when you go to the polls.
Good point. Yeah.
Yeah. I think we've covered really. Steve, it was really
you got
well
a lot
done.
in there.
Really,
man.
that was amazing.
Good job.
Oh, perfect. My last question is: did we miss anything? Do you have any other broad sweeping statements or anything else that you wanted to say on the topic of clean energy, solar power, community action, sustainability?
Having a hard time remembering all what I said. I was probably talking too
how
fast.
How much more could you
too
say?
Much.
I mean, there are so many options here now. I got to go solar. I've been dreaming about it for a long time, but now I'm going to do it.
Yeah. Maybe something like why you're so passionate about why you do what you do.
Yeah, that's a great question, Sue, and one I should reflect on more, right? I just find it fascinating as it evolves and we move from, a more centralized kind of approach to alternatives where individuals can harvest their own energy for their own home. And it's just a fascinating kind of way to, see an industry that hadn't changed start to really pick up the speed and change into something where now the, consumers just have a lot of choice around all sorts of things that they can do in their home to both conserve, to generate, and to store energy. And it's just always been something that I've found, uniquely fascinating. And certainly I've also been inspired by the fact that I think it is a way to begin to address our transition, away from a true carbon economy and into something that will be more sustainable in the long term.
Awesome.
Amazing.
Yeah.
Thanks, Steve. This has been awesome. Great having you on the show.
Yeah, anytime.
So that's a great place then to talk about community. Mm-hmm. What can we do? How can we help make this a better ecological space in the Okanagan?
Yeah, for sure. It's totally overwhelming when you look at the situation. When you turn on the news, COP29 is happening as we film this, right? They're fighting over how much developed nations are going to pay developing nations for the climate emergency that has happened, right? Like there's, that's what you'll see if you turn on the news tonight. And 2 days ago, the bomb cyclone hit Vancouver Island, right? This is big, scary stuff. And everyone feels that. I feel that working in the industry. You can't not. I find that for me, and I hope for others, if I genuinely engage in efforts to improve my performance with respect to climate change or the resiliency of my personal property or the resiliency of my clients' project properties, I regain a bit of sense of agency, and it feels doable. It feels like I can do something about it. And so engage in the tools around you. We're super lucky in Vernon to have had lots of smart people put together a climate action plan. And that climate action plan is based on regional data. And so you can open it up and read it and learn about where our emissions are coming from, sort of in aggregate, like transportation, building, waste management. You can find out sort of where the big causes are coming from. But the important part for the community is they provided a big table of action items in there. So you can go through and think, okay, well, I've got maybe a fire risk. I'd like to look at fire smarting my property. They can connect you to the resource through that. They can connect you to opportunities to reduce your emissions. Like we live in the trails capital of Canada, I think. So maybe you can consider a transport alternative, something like that. So that's a really useful and valuable document for our community. And it's honestly, it's applicable. Those action steps are applicable to many communities around us. Even if the specific regional climate data isn't valuable, the steps are valuable. So that's one for sure.
And it's super easy to find on the City of Vernon website, the Climate Action Plan. I found it. I downloaded it. I have not read the whole thing because it is a giant document, because there's so much to consider when we talk about what we can do.
Yeah, skip to the table if you're looking for the steps. Like, you don't have to read all the details if you're just looking for the hacks to help your way through. Those are in the table. Yeah. If you're interested, we got tons of resources to learn about the natural world too. The Allen Brooks Nature Center is a great resource that we have here in the Okanagan. Wonderful events. A great place to take your kids to learn about the species in the ecosystem around us. You could take a stream keepers course or a wetland keepers course to learn about those critical parts of our watersheds. They're important for fisheries. They're also super important for flood control, especially wetlands. And you can learn how to improve those and restore those on a volunteer basis. You don't have to wait for some professional to come along and tell you what to do. So there's tons of ways to sort of empower yourself out there.
That's really hands-on too, with people that want to actually get their hands on something and get dirty and get to work.
You bet.
Right?
Yeah, you bet.
Yeah, that's cool.
Bring
this
your boots.
ties into so many of the topics that we've been talking about already through the episodes on Backyards to Boardrooms, from mental health to education to waste management to managing our natural resources. Like this, it all ties together.
Well, yeah, I mean, the problem, however you frame it, is a collective problem. We built it collectively, and we're only going to solve it collectively. So having all those different perspectives is super important.
What I really enjoyed hearing is that a lot of these initiatives, you think about solar energy, for example, they just seem so out of reach for a lot of people. But, from what I'm understanding is that solar energy has never been more accessible than it is today. From affordability to what you can do with it, the demand for it, the services that are available for putting it in, and it ties in so well with, what Dora was talking about with Ecotecture. And again, with Matt, with, creating environments that are more sustainable for the greater good.
Yeah. What I found really interesting was like the obvious point that Steve made in Roost Solar, saying that we're going to collect the most solar energy when we're in the drought situation, when we're in those dire situations that require a little bit more effort from the rest of our infrastructure in this community. That's when solar power is most available, because there's a lot of sun. Right? So it seems like common sense, but it's right there. And I really enjoyed all three of those conversations for sure.
Yeah, there was the trade-off too between, as we increase our usage of electricity to, for our vehicles and for solar power and for using that alternative clean energy, we're also taking away from what we're generating as far as hydropower.
Well, and how that aligns with building technology, right? How efficient, how well is your building functioning with the power that is generated for it? And that's where Ecotecture comes in. And how is that impacting your environment? That's where Sage Environmental comes in. Super awesome. All three of these, what was different about this episode is that all three of these guests were private businesses, private-owned businesses, as opposed to nonprofits or government entities that we've had in other episodes. But I think it's a really neat perspective, for sure.
Very much. I loved it.
Thanks for listening to Backyards to Boardrooms.
Don't forget to subscribe, and all the links to the cool things you learned are down in the notes below.
Bye!
Bye!